So you want to make a character. Well, there are a few ways to go about it. I prefer box modeling, that's what I'm doing in this video, and it's basically just starting with simple shapes, pushing points around, and slowly adding detail as you need it. Another common workflow is sculpting and then retopologizing. With sculpting, the upside is that you can make whatever shapes you want without worrying about topology, but then you end up with a really dense mesh, and that makes it not very good for rigging and animating, so you have to fix the topology if you want to do those things. There's also something to be said about style. Like if you want to make a more realistic model, then the arms and the legs will probably be connected to the torso, and you have to put a little more effort into making things attach properly. But if you're alright with how it looks, there's nothing stopping you from keeping all of the limbs as separate objects, which is what I usually do, and it's what we'll do to make this character because it's a little more beginner friendly. But before we do that, I want to show you how quickly you can make a low poly human model. I personally don't really like making realistic humans, and I think if you plan on doing that, you should just find a free human model to use as a base mesh, and then sculpt on top of it and do some retopology. There are plenty of free models and retopology tools just for realistic humans, and Nagi over here actually does this in a few videos. But for the sake of knowledge, let's make a low poly human, and then you can make the Lethal Company sequel or something like that. So let's open up Blender, and this is version 4.1, but all of this should work even if you're using version 3.0, so don't worry too much about that. Also, this is a beginner tutorial, but if you don't know how to move around Blender, or if you want to learn a little about modeling first, then check out these two videos of mine to get up to speed, and just know that you might have to pause occasionally to follow this video. So if you want a reference picture, you can drag it directly into Blender when you're in object mode, and you can change the opacity over here. But I'm not using one in this video, so I'm just going to delete it with X. Okay, first thing we need is a cube, so if you don't already have one in your scene, you can press Shift A and add in a cube right here. And if you're wondering why my colors look like this and you want yours to look like this, you can just go up to the top right up here, click this arrow, set it to matte cap, and choose this one or one of the other ones from the list. And I also always have cavity turned on and set to both, and this just accentuates the edges and makes it a little easier to see. So this cube is going to be used for the torso. I'm just going to press 1 to look from the front right here and tab into edit mode. And this should already be selected, but you can also press A to select everything, G and Z to bring it up just a little bit right there, and S to scale it down. Now you might be able to see these squares right here. Each one of these squares is 1 meter, and people are typically under 2 meters tall. So I usually use 2 of these squares as like a reference for human height. So I'm just going to try to keep everything under 2 meters. Press S to scale, and right now I'm looking for the width of this. I'm going to make it as wide as I think the torso should be, so maybe right about here. S and Z to scale it up, G, Z, bring it up. Now let's look from the side, and I want to make this a little skinnier, so S and Y to scale it on the Y axis right there. Now I'm going to add a neck. You can either press 3 to go into face select mode, or click this button up here, select the top face, I to inset just a little bit. And I want this to be a little more square, so I'll press S and X, and we can scale it on the X axis. G and Z to bring it up just a little bit. E to extrude to bring this up. E to extrude again. S to scale, this is going to be for the head. E to extrude, and S to scale that down. So now we have a torso and a head, and I want a spot for the arm to come out. So let's press Ctrl R to add in a loop cut, and we'll bring this up to right about here. I'm looking for something that's kind of close to a square shape right here. Now again, press 3 to go into face select mode, or click this button up here. Select that face right there. E to extrude just a little bit. We can press S to scale that down. This is going to be for the shoulder area. Now E to extrude, we're going to extrude out to where we think maybe the wrist should be. Scale that down. Now if you want to make this more rectangular, you can. I'll press S and Z. We can scale it down right about there. This is going to be for the wrist. Now we can E to extrude for the hand, Control R for another loop cut. This is going to be for the thumb. We're not going to make all the fingers. This is going to be kind of mitten style. Press 3 to go into face select mode, or that button up there. E to extrude out for the thumb, and we can scale that down. I'm going to scale it on the Z axis to make it a little skinnier at the end. Now, don't worry about the other side right now because we're just going to add a mirror modifier later. So we're only going to do one side right now. It's a good idea to add some loops for the elbow. So I'll press Control R. We can add one right in the middle with right click. Now I'll bevel this with Control B and use the scroll wheel to add another loop in the middle right here. This will make it so the elbow deforms a little better when we bend the arm. Now we need a spot for the legs to come out. So we're going to add a loop cut right down the middle right here with Control R. 3 to go into face select mode. Select that bottom face. E to extrude, and we can scale that down just a little bit. Now we'll look from the front with 1 and E to extrude down to right about here where we think like the ankle is going to start. We can S to scale, and I also want to extrude down. This is going to be for our foot. Now, if you want it to snap to the 0 point perfectly, you can go up here to snapping settings, leave it set to increment, but we can turn on absolute grid snap. Now, when you're moving this around with G, you can hold Control and it will snap to the grid. So we can snap it to that perfect point right there. And you can even see over here that the Z is set to 0 meters, so we know it worked right. Now, I'll look from the side over here. Make sure you're in face select. We can select this front face and E to extrude. This is going to be for the foot. Maybe zoom out to make sure that it's the size you want. Go into edge select mode with that button or 2, and we can bring this top part down. And if you want the foot to be able to bend in the middle a little better, you can also add a loop cut here. Press Control B to bevel it. And again, you can use the scroll wheel to make sure that there's a loop in the middle also. To shape the foot a little more, let's press 1 to look from the front, Alt Z to go into X-ray mode, or you can press this button up here. 1 for vertex select, and I'll just select the whole bottom of the foot and press S and X to scale that out just a little bit right here. And I'll select these 2 points right here and pull this out for the heel. Now we can add a loop for the knee with Control R, and again, Control B to bevel that and make sure that there's a loop in the middle. Another thing I like to do for the hip area is, again, press Alt Z to go into X-ray mode, select these points right here and just bring them up slightly like that. Now we should probably mirror this to get the arm and the leg to the other side. So I'm actually just going to select everything on this side right here. Again, I'm in X-ray mode for this, so I am actually selecting all the way through. Press X and delete all the vertices. Now we can come over here to the modifier panel. It looks like a little wrench. Click the add modifier button, and you can either type in mirror, just start typing mirror, or under generate, you can add the mirror modifier right there. Now, if this isn't working right for you, it might mean that your origin point is not actually in the center. So just select your model right here, press Control A and apply the location, and that should make this work now. We can also smooth this out with a subdivision surface modifier. You can press Control 1, Control 2, or Control 3, and that's just going to change the viewport level over here. And now we can go into edit mode again and start smoothing this out so it's a little less boxy. You can see it's pretty flat in the front right there. So what I like to do is select the whole center loop right here. You can do that with Alt and left click, and I'll press 7 to look from the top, S and Y, and we can scale this out just a little bit, and you can see it's getting a little more round. And if you want, you can do this separately for the head and for the body, but I just did it for the whole thing. I'll make the head a little bit wider also. So again, I'm in X-ray mode for this with Alt Z. I'll just select these 2 points right here, and we can bring it out so it's a little more round. And if you want to mess with any of the proportions, make the legs a little longer, anything like that, you can make your character skinnier. Now is the time to do that. It's also a good idea to press Control R and add 1 or 2 loops in the body right here, and that will make it deform a little bit better as well. This is low poly, but when you rig it up, it will deform pretty well. Isn't that right? If this is too low res for you, you can add more detail by applying the subdivision surface modifier, and then you'll have more verts to work with. There are also ways of making the joints deform better, and you can find some topology guides if you look around. I like searching on Pinterest, but this is definitely enough for a beginner video, so let's put this stylized character together now. The main difference with this one is that all of the limbs are separate pieces, and I think this makes it much easier to get complex shapes because you don't really have to worry about connecting them. You'll see what I mean. But first, let's talk about Playbook, who is the sponsor for this video. Playbook is a cloud storage website that is specifically made for creatives and collaboration, and before I tell you anything else, you can use my link to get 4 terabytes of storage for free. Yes, for free. No strings attached. Now that I have your attention, I think Playbook is going to be a great fit for most of you watching. First off, it definitely excels at viewing and organizing images and videos. I dropped all my renders in here and it kept the folder structure, which is cool, but you can also reorder stuff, check it out in a different view, or group files together. You can also add tags to everything, so if I want to see all my avatar renders, I can give them a tag and then see them all at once, even if they're in different folders. You can also link other cloud storage sites like Google Drive and Dropbox to see all of your files in Playbook. Sharing files is really easy, just turn on sharing and anyone with the link can view and comment and even leave timestamps on videos, which makes it really good for client work since they'll be able to comment about changes they'd like. And if you want to give more control, you can invite people as collaborators and then they can add things of their own. You could also publish one of your boards and use it like a portfolio or as a way of sharing files with the public. Playbook is still pretty new, so they're always adding new features, and you can see what's on the roadmap and suggest features yourself. 4 terabytes is a ton of free storage, and if you need more, you can sign up for one of their other plans. And just so you know, these other paid plans is how they make money and what makes this free tier possible. They aren't in the business of selling data, and if they were, I wouldn't be advertising this right now. So use my link in the description for 4 terabytes of storage and a brand new creative hub on Playbook. For real, check out Playbook. When you support them, you're also supporting me. Alright, back to the video. So for the next character, let's start a new file. Just make sure you save first. So for this one, I do have some reference photos. Let's just make a new collection by hovering over here and pressing C. So I have them right here. I have 3 of them, and you can get these by following the link in the description. I'm just going to press 1 to look from the front, and then I'll drag it in. I'll press 3 to look from the side, drag in the side picture, and 7 to look from above. And these are the numpad shortcuts. You can also just use this widget in the corner. And from the top, let's just drag in the top right here. Now we can select all of them, press Alt-G, and that will snap them to the center. Now from the front, I'm just going to bring this up, G and Z, and we can scale it down. Again, I'm just looking at these 2 squares, so we can scale them down until it looks about the right height. And they should all be the same size, so you don't really have to resize them. Now with all of them selected, you can press this button over here and we can turn on opacity. But while you're checking this, hold Alt and that will toggle it for all of them at the same time. Now we can turn this down slightly. And again, I'm holding Alt while I change this. Otherwise, it's only going to change 1. Now, just so they don't get in the way of anything, I'm gonna push them around. And now if we want to turn them on and off, we have all of them in their own collection up here. And I'm just going to make it so none of them can be selected by pressing this button right here. And if you don't have that, you can turn it on with this button over here in the corner. Now let's make a new collection. And this is just going to be for our cat, which is named Bezo. You can name it whatever you want though. And again, we're just going to start with some cubes. So Shift A, add in a cube right here. I'm going to press Control 2 to add a subdivision surface modifier, as you can see over here. Now from the front, bring it up, scale it down. This is going to be for the head. We're just going to get a lot of the shapes started. Shift D, bring this down. This is going to be for the body. Then I'll add in a plane with Shift A. And this is going to be for the arms and the legs. And I'm going to use the skin modifier for this. You can actually make a whole base character with the skin modifier, and you can see that in this video over here. So let's go to the modifier panel, press the add modifier button, and I'm just going to search for mirror. You can just start typing. So we have the mirror modifier. I want the skin modifier, enter, and a subdivision surface. So the skin modifier, basically what it does is it gives thickness to edges, as you can see here, and then the subdivision is just smoothing it out. So now we can tab into edit mode. I'm going to look from the front. Alt-Z for X-ray mode. And I actually want to merge everything into one point. So M, merge at center, like that. Make sure you're in vertex select mode, select this point, and press Control A, and that's how you scale it up and down, or you can mess with these values over here. So I'm going to scale this down until the thickness looks about right, and we can just start moving this around. Again, I'm in edit mode for this. This is going to be for the leg, so I'll bring it up here, E to extrude, Z to bring it straight down like that. It might be hard to tell in the recording, but there is a circle around this point right here, and that means that this is the root, which is important because if you have a line that doesn't have a root, the skin modifier won't recognize it and it won't make it thick. So make sure that you're duplicating the one with the circle around it. So Shift D, and I'll bring that up right about here, E and X, and we can bring it out We're not going to make the hands right now. We'll make those in a little bit. And just to show you how to handle this if it doesn't have a root, let's just duplicate this one right here. And to bring it to the center, we can go up here and for the X, type in 0 and we'll extrude that upward. Now this doesn't have any thickness, so let's just select this point right here, go over to the modifier panel and press mark root, and now it will get thicker. Let's tab back into object mode, Shift A, and I'm going to add in a cube, and this is going to be for the feet. Let's press tab to go into edit mode, GZ1, that's going to bring it up 1 meter, tab back into object mode. And that just makes it so that the origin is at the very bottom. So when we scale it, you can see it's instead of scaling from the center, it's scaling from the bottom of the cube. So for this, I actually want a mirror modifier. We can just press this, type in mirror. And if we move it to the side, you can see it's not really mirroring. Again, that's because it mirrors from the origin point. So like I said before, you can press Control A and apply the location and that will work. But I like being able to scale it from here. So instead of doing that, let's go to this mirror object in the modifier panel. I'm going to select the head. Basically, you want it to be something that's in the middle because that's what's determining the center point for the mirror modifier. So now we can move this to wherever we want over here. Let's turn the reference back on and just scale it to a point where you think it looks good or if it matches the reference. Now with everything in place, let's press A, Control A, and apply the scale. This is important for modifiers because a lot of modifiers look at the scale and this will change how they act. So it's important to apply your scale right now. Nothing is named over here. You can either select things over here, double click, and rename it. So I'll name this head, or you can do this in the viewport by selecting and pressing F2. I'll name this torso, limbs, and feet. And don't forget to save. So just like the first model, you can stop right here and use this as a base for a bunch of different characters. Let's keep going though, so we can make this a little more polished. We'll start with the head. I'm just going to duplicate this with Shift D, and this is what we're going to use to make this mouth area that you can see in the reference. S and Y to bring this out a little bit, and we can just get this kind of close. Look from the front, S, X, and we can bring this across. If we want, we can scale this in slightly. Now again, make sure that you're applying the scale of these. So I'll select both of them, Control A, apply scale. So when we select the head and tab into edit mode, you can see that it's still a cube, and I want to make the ears and the fur and stuff like that. But if I start adding more loop cuts with Control R, you can see it's changing the shape pretty dramatically. So before going into edit mode, let's actually go over to the modifiers and we can actually apply this right here. I like to apply it with as little detail as I need. We can click this button, press apply, and then we can tab back into edit mode and we have all these squares to work with now. Let's select these two faces right here. I to inset, I again for individual right here, and I'll scale this down pretty small. And now I want to bring this out. For this, I like to use Alt S, which is the shrink and fatten tool like that. Look from the front and get this pretty close. And if we want, we can smooth this out back in object mode with Control 2. And we're going to use the mirror modifier for this one. So let's tab back into edit mode, Alt Z. I'm going to press 1 to go into vertex select, select half, X, delete those. Now back in object mode, we can add a mirror modifier. You can see this seam in the middle. That's just because the mirror modifier isn't first, so we can just drag it to the top like that, and it should clear that up. Now tab back into object mode. For the ears, I'm going to select these and extrude them, but I want them to be more circular, so I'm going to press Control Z to go back, and we actually want to use an add-on for this, but it's already built in, so you don't have to worry about downloading anything. Just go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and you can search for loop tools. Make sure this is enabled, and then you can go to Save Preferences if you want that to always be on. With these faces selected, right-click, Loop Tools is at the top, and you can just select Circle, and it will turn all of these into a circle. So I'm just gonna scale this up. Don't scale it up so much so that, you know, these points overlap over here, but I'm gonna scale it up pretty big, and E to extrude right about there. I'm going to scale this down. I want them to be kind of round at the edge. You can look from the side, and I'll bring this forward just a little bit. If you want, you can also make this even more round by going into X-ray mode, press 1 for vertex select. We can select these and just move them up like that. I'm also going to select this and bring it forward. Now, if you're having trouble seeing where the points are, we have a few options. Over here on the subdivision surface modifier, you can either turn this off in the viewport, and this works for object and edit mode. This one right here turns it off only in edit mode, and this one makes it so that it kind of conforms to it. So usually I just kind of turn it on and off, and you'll see me do that quite a bit. So now I want to make the inner ear, so I'm going to select these two faces, I to inset, I again so it's not individual, and we can scale that in quite a bit. Going to select these 3 points right here and drag them down, bring them in like that. Let's select these faces again and just extrude that. And if you want, you can also scale it up slightly. Let's make these whiskers next. So I'm just going to select this right here, and you can see we're still working with a cube. So I'm actually going to apply this also, and I'll press Ctrl 2 in the viewport, tab into edit mode, select these 3 faces right here, I to inset, I again. And if these aren't square enough for you, you can do a few things. You can right click, go to loop tools, and change this to a circle. You only have 4 points to work with, so it's just going to turn it into a square basically. And if you want to scale it down further, but they're all scaling at the same time like that, you can press period and change the pivot points to individual origins. That's also this option up here, and then it will scale the individual faces down. Now we can press E to extrude these out, and you can see they're already being pushed in the normal direction, but if they aren't, you can Control Z to go back, and you can use Alt E instead, and then you have these other options, one of which is extrude faces along normals, which should make that work. And I want these to be sharp right here instead of smooth like that. So I'm going to press 2 to go into edge select mode, and we can select this edge with Alt and left click. And you can see when I have the subdivision surface turned on and I change this mean crease option all the way up, it becomes sharp right there. The shortcut for that is Shift E. So let's select this one with Alt and left click and press Shift E instead. You can see it does the same thing. So we can do that for all of them. Let's mirror this also. So in edit mode, let's just go into X-ray mode, and we can select this half, and I'll delete the vertices. We can go over here, add the mirror modifier, and make sure it's at the top. For the nose, we're going to use some modifiers for this too. So Shift A, add in a plane, press R, X, 90 to rotate it 90 degrees, drag it up, and I'm just gonna start scaling it down and getting it into place. And I want to add 2 modifiers, one of which is the subdivision surface. So for that, we can do Control 2. And the other one is to give it some thickness, and that is the solidify modifier. So either under generate, you can choose solidify, or you can just start typing it in. And to make this smoother, we can just bring the solidify to the top. And we can also play with the thickness amount. And I usually like to set the offset to 0 so that it's extruding from the center like that. Let's bring this a little closer to the face, look from the front, and we can start shaping this. If it's too hard to see, you can actually just select other objects and press H to hide them, and then you can press Alt H to bring them back. So I'm just gonna hide these 2. We can select the nose and keep modeling in edit mode. So I'm just going to select these top 2 points, and we can scale this out quite a bit, scale this one down. So in object mode, I'll press Alt H, rotate it from the side to kind of make it conform to the head. Now, if you want a mouth that's a little more realistic and is actually built into the head, you can use the method that I show in this video over here. It'll show you some topology tricks to make it pretty easy. But for this one, we're going to go for a more 2D style mouth, and it's basically using the same method that I used for the nose. So we can just duplicate the nose right here, press Alt R to reset the rotation, RX 90 to rotate it 90 degrees. We can drag it down and to the side. Tab into edit mode, we can scale this down a little, scale this one up to make it a little more rectangular. Select everything with A, S to scale, Z, we'll make this a little thinner. I'll add a loop cut in the middle, scale this. Select these 2 side points, bring it down a little and rotate. I want it even thinner, so I'll select all of these points on the bottom and press GG to loop slide. Now back in object mode, we can rotate this a little. Now this looks a little too thick, so we can select it, go to the modifier panel and turn down the thickness. If it's moving too fast, you can hold shift and that makes it move a little slower like that. And if you don't want to have to like rotate this and like snap it to the face manually, you can turn on face snapping. So to do that, go up to the snapping menu up here. You can turn on face, turn on center, and you can turn on align rotation to target. That's going to make it rotate based on the face that you're snapping it to. Just make sure to turn it off if you want it to stop rotating. So now when you press G and hold Control, it will snap like that. Let's go into X-ray mode and just line this up a little closer. We can also rotate it a little like that. And if you want, you can scale it down, do whatever you want to make it look good to you. If you do scale it at all, just make sure that you're applying the scale afterward. Again, for the eyes, we're going to do kind of a two-dimensional method, but if you want something that's more realistic, you can watch this video over here. I talk about how to make 3 different types of eyes. And don't worry about rigging and animating this, because I'm going to show that in the next video. It's actually really easy to rig a 2D style eye like this, so don't worry about that. So let's just select the nose again, Shift D to duplicate, and I'm actually going to bring this back to the origin first with Alt G and Alt R. We can tab into edit mode. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to add a plane. The reason I'm doing this is basically so that we can keep the modifiers that we already have, but I am going to add a new one, which is the mirror modifier. Just make sure that's at the very top. And we don't want this to merge together unless you're looking for something a little more like a Sonic style eye. So I'm going to turn off merging. Back in object mode, I'm just going to set the mirror object to the head. Now I still have face snapping turned on over here, so I'll press G and hold Control, and you can see it's kind of snapping to the face. We can just scale that down over here so that they're not like plates stuck to the head like this. I'm actually going to use the shrink wrap modifier. So again, we can go to add modifier, shrink wrap, which I think is under deform. It is right here, but you can also just type it in. Now let's bring this again to the very top, and we can target the head, because that's what we want it to shrink wrap to. So it looks like it disappeared, but it's actually just inside of the head. And that's because it's only actually snapping 4 points. Let's come into edit mode, right click, and we can subdivide once, go to loop tools and turn this into a circle. Back in object mode, we can also press Control A and apply the scale. And that's just going to make it so that the solidify modifier is actually reading an accurate thickness right here. We can make that thicker. Now we can basically just scale this to whatever we think looks good. I'll use the reference, and this is actually pretty close already. So to rotate it so that they're not all diagonal like this, I'll press R, Z, Z, and that's gonna rotate it on the local axis, and we can just get it a little flatter. And back in edit mode, if you want, you can, change the shape of these, bring these down a little. I'll select the middle and I'll bring that down. Now for the pupils, we can do the same thing. I'm actually just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to turn off shrink wrapping, and we can scale this down. Back in edit mode, just select everything, right click, and turn this into a circle. Back in object mode, we can press G and hold Control to start snapping like this. And if you don't like how the origin point isn't actually in the very center, you can reset it by right clicking, set origin to center of mass surface, like that. Using face snapping with rotating makes this a lot easier because you don't actually have to adjust the rotation. So I definitely recommend using that. And don't forget to apply the scale when you're done with this, because it's going to change what the solidify modifier actually looks like. The eyebrows are using the same method, so let's just duplicate the pupils right here. We can drag this up. I'm just going to hide a few of these with H. Press Alt R, RX 90, so that it's flat. It's a little easier to work with when it's flat, in my opinion. Now in edit mode, let's select this loop right here with Alt left click, and we can press Control X. That will actually dissolve it. I believe if you just press X, you also get dissolve options right here, and I was in edge mode for that, so you want to make sure you're dissolving the edges. Now let's just bring this a little closer over here, a little further out. We can scale this down also, scale the center up. And in object mode, this is where we can rotate it to, get it a little closer. I am going to come in here, select these two, press a G, and then XX, and that will move it in the local orientation, because I know these are supposed to be a little longer probably. Back in object mode, Alt H, so we can actually see everything. And now we can start rotating this, and I'll snap it to the pupils to match the rotation, and we can just drag it up like that. And I also want to make this thicker. The only thing left is the hair, and for that, Shift A, we can add in a cube. In edit mode, GZ1 to move it up 1 meter. Then back in object mode, you can see it's scaling from the bottom now. I'll look from the side and bring it up over here to where the hair is. Can just scale it down. Control 2 to give it a subdivision surface. Scale it up on the Z, and then S, Shift Z to make it skinnier. And I'm just trying to gauge the thickness it should be. So the shape that I'm looking for is going to be something like this in edit mode. Make sure you're in X-ray mode also. Let's just bring this down quite a bit. You can add one loop in the center. I'll move this a little like that. And for the two ends, I'll rotate them like this. and that's going to get us a shape that's a little closer to this arc over here. You can also scale down the end, and if you want, you can scale this up. Okay, now back in object mode, we can actually get this in place and start rotating. Shift D to duplicate, scale it down, Shift D one more time, and we can bring it over here with G, scale it down, rotate it, you know, just line it up. Now let's make sure all of these have the scale applied with Control A, apply the scale. Now in the reference, these aren't actually going straight forward. They're kind of sticking off to the side a little. So we can mimic that by selecting the hair and rotating on the Z axis like that. Bring it to the side just a little. And I want to keep the hair looking like it's kind of in the center. So I'll just drag these few. Now, if you want to stay organized, it's probably a good idea to actually name all of these things. So I'm just going to go through real fast and rename everything. Next, we can work on the coat right here. So for that, I'm just going to actually duplicate the body, scale it up a little, and rename it with F2. I'll just name it coat. This is still a cube, so what I'm going to do is turn this down one subdivision like that, and then apply it, and then press Control 2 to add another subdivision surface back in. And I also want this to have a thickness to it, so I'm going to add a solidify modifier and just make sure that this is at the top so that it's extruding and then smoothing that out. Now if I come into edit mode, look from the front, and I'm actually just going to delete the bottom point right here, you can see that it does actually have a little bit of a thickness to it, but let's make it even thicker like that. I'll select the entire bottom loop, SZ0, and that's just gonna flatten it out on the Z axis. We can bring this down to about here and scale it out. If you want this to be more circular, you can use the Loop Tools add-on for that again. To get this collar, what we can do is select the top point, press Control plus, and that's just gonna expand the selection. You can press 3 to go into face select mode, and I'm just going to inset this with I. I don't want this to be individual, so I'll press I again. I'll right click, go to Loop Tools, and circle. Extrude that up, and I'm actually going to press X and delete the faces, and that's just gonna make it hollow at the top also. I wanna select this top loop, so go into Vertex Select, and we can just scale this out. Basically what I'm looking for is that so it isn't cutting into the head really. So I'm gonna look from the side. We can rotate it a little like that also, maybe scale it out a little more. I'm gonna select some of these points and press GG to loop slide to make this crease a little less sharp. And I'm only focusing on one side because we're just gonna mirror it after. I'll bring this one down too. And before doing the sleeve or deleting half and adding the mirror modifier, I'm going to work on this bottom part right here. You can see in the reference, it looks like there's kind of this almost like an elastic waistband. So to make that, let's go back to edit mode. I'll select the entire bottom loop, E to extrude, S to scale, and we'll just scale in and extrude down on the Z axis. I'll select this entire loop right here, this middle one with Alt and left click, and we can just drag that up. It will start to kind of cut through, and you just have to move things around until it matches the shape a little better. The bottommost loop, we can scale that out a little bit also. I'll select all of them and just start moving them around a little bit. It looks like we're pretty close to the reference, so let's go into edit mode, X-ray mode, and then delete half of this, and we can add in the mirror modifier. Make sure that's at the very top, and that merge is actually on. Now we can make the sleeve over here. So for that, I'll go into face select, select these two faces, I to inset, right click, and use Loop Tools to make a circle right here. I'll just scale that down so nothing is overlapping. Now from the front, I don't really want this to go inward like that, so I'll drag it out. And I want to scale this down to be a little bit smaller right here and just going around where the arm is. I'll press E and then X to extrude it outward like this. SX0, and that will flatten it on the X axis. Control R to add some loop cuts so we can get the shape of the sleeve a little better. And as we move it, you can see that the loop is changing shape. So if I want to match the shape of one side or the other, you can press E, and to switch sides, you can press F. So it's either going to copy the exact shape of one side or the exact shape of the other right here. So I'll put it right there, Control R to add another loop right here. And I forgot I actually want to delete these faces right here so that they're open. Now I can select these loops and scale them up like this. If you want this cuff to be a little sharper, you can do the same thing as I did for the waistband and kind of make them overlap like this. This loop right here, I'll scale on the Z-axis like that and drag it down a little. You can do the same thing for this one too if you want. I'm also going to select this part and drag it in a little just to make it a little more triangular. Again, make sure that the scale is applied, and if anything changes, you can adjust it to look how you want. Let's do the hands next, so we can just select this right here, tab into edit mode, look from the top. Hands with the skin modifier is actually pretty easy. Extrude on the X-axis a little bit, and then Control A to scale it down quite a bit. As you can see, I only have 3 fingers right here. If you want, you can add 4, you can add as many as you want, really. Basically, all you do is just extrude to the tip of the fingers right here, or I guess the bottom of the fingers, and then I'll select all of them right here. I'm just going to press S, X, and 0 to flatten them out on the X-axis, and then E and X, we can extrude it out. I'll bring this out a little further. And for the thumb, we can extrude from the same point, right about here, and then E, Y. Press Control A to start scaling it up, and you can see at some point it will start to actually connect everything together. Now we can just select all of the fingers, so I'm using box select right here, click and drag, and holding Shift, and then Control A, and you can just scale everything up until it's the thickness that you want. Another thing to pay attention to is the thumb placement, so you can see as I move it, the topology is going to change. Basically, just try to avoid it kinking and overlapping and stuff like this. So that's it for the hands. We can tab back into object mode, and we can do the shoes next. I'll add a subdivision surface with Control 2, tab into edit mode, face select. I'll grab the front face right here, look from the side, and I'll just drag it out right about here. I'll select these points and drag this out, and I'm gonna add a few loops now. So let's add a loop cut right here with Control R. Control R again. Let's select these points right here, move them down a little bit, these ones right here, and pull them up. We can just try to kind of match the shape of the reference over here. We can add a loop cut with R right here. Another way, instead of pressing E and F and stuff like that, you can just bring it all the way to the bottom right here and then move it back up like that, and it'll be flat also. So this is for the bottom part of the shoe right here. Let's go into face select mode, Alt and left click to select this loop of faces, E to extrude, S to scale, and then Shift Z so that it doesn't scale up on the, the Z axis like that. I also want to turn merging off so that it doesn't actually connect to the other shoe. And to make it a little more even, we can scale it on just the X axis right there. 2 to go into edge select mode, Alt and left click right here, and let's turn the mean crease all the way up for this like that. Now if you want, you can adjust the thickness of this again with scaling on whatever axis until it looks good to you. Let's select this whole face loop again with Alt and left click, S and X. We can scale that out a little bit to make these shoes a little chunkier. I know the shoes are touching each other, but I want them big, and this is something that we can remedy when it gets to like rigging and setting poses and stuff like that. But if this is bothering you, you can go back into object mode and just scale them down. You can also make the character wider so their legs are further apart. But in edit mode still, I'm just going to select this face right here, Shift D to duplicate, I to inset, and we're gonna delete this face with X. The shortcut to select an entire separated piece of a mesh is L. We're in face select, so we can just hover over any face and press L, and it will select that whole piece that we just made. Now we can just extrude that upward right here. L again to select the whole thing. We can scale this on the Y. Let's also scale this up, and I'm just moving it into place right here. If you got the thickness wrong, you can always select this inner loop again with Alt and left click to select those faces, and then S, Shift Z, and you can scale it all however you want. For the tongue of the shoe right here, I'm basically just going to select this face, Shift D to duplicate, and I'll drag it up, scale it down just a little bit. We can add a loop cut. To get the shape a little better, we can scale this in, scale individual edges right here. I like to scale the middle one out a little. It makes it much rounder. Then we can select this top part right here and try to kind of match this angle. And the subdivision surface is actually smoothing this out quite a bit. Let's select these two faces and E to extrude to give this a little bit of a thickness like that. If it's too thick or too thin, you can press Alt S to shrink or fatten it like that. Let's select this and rotate it more. Now I'll press L to select the whole thing, and we can move it into place. Last are the shorts, and if you want, you can skip this and just change the color of the legs to make it look more like tight pants, but I kind of like the shorts. So for those, I'm actually going to use the shoes right here. We can just duplicate that, I'll press Alt-G to bring it back into the center, tab into edit mode, A to select everything, X, and we'll delete everything, and add in a cube, scale it down quite a bit. And I'm just going to delete the bottom face right here. So we can press X, delete that face. And I also want to add a solidify modifier. So type in solidify, and just make sure that that is above the subdivision surface right here. Back in object mode, I'm just gonna get this into place and be the size that I want before I actually apply the scale and mess with the solidify. Okay, I think this is pretty close. Let's press Control A, apply the scale, and then we can come over to the solidify and we can change the thickness to be a little thicker. And now we basically just have to move these faces around until we think that it looks good. So let's just select the bottom loop, scale it out. Can also bring this up quite a bit higher. All right, back in object mode, we can select everything, right click and shade smooth. The only thing that isn't going to be shaded smooth is what we made with the skin modifier. And we should actually duplicate this anyway so that we can apply it, mainly because it's gonna make it easier to texture paint when we get to that. So let's press Shift D to duplicate this, and then we can find it in the outliner and we can just hide that right there. Let's select this one that's visible and we can apply the skin modifier right there. So now if we tab into edit mode, you can see that, you know, it's more than just a few edges. We also have a ton of faces and thickness and whatnot. Now we should be able to right click it and shade smooth. If you want to shade smooth with the skin modifier, you just have to use this button right here. The whiskers look kind of weird because they're shaded smooth even where it's supposed to be sharp right here. So you used to be able to right click and shade smooth by angle, but now it's a little different. Just select the whiskers, go to the modifier panel, and under normals, we have smooth by angle, and that's just gonna clear it right up for you. Next, we can add some color. There are a lot of ways to add color and materials, and I'll be showing how to use this color palette method, but you could also use texture painting. You could make a separate material for each color you want and then select and assign those materials to different parts of the model. You can find free textures from a site like Polyhaven, then use the Node Wrangler add-ons Shift-Control-T shortcut to set them up fast. Or you can use a separate program like Substance Painter. Now, I'm not going to cover all of these things, but at least you'll know what to search for if you want to learn more. So you can download this color palette for free from Gumroad and then just come back here. To set up the color palette, we should go into the shading tab up here. I'll select the head and then we can press new right here. All we have to do is bring in the image texture. So let's press Shift A and you can just search image and choose image texture. Then press open and find the texture palette that you just downloaded. So it might be in your downloads folder. Mine is over here, and then we can just press open. Now just drag the color into the base color right here. Make sure this is set to closest. You can also give the material a name, and that's it. Now we just have to add this material to everything else. So with this still selected, you can press A, Control L, and then you can press linked materials, and that should add it to everything else. Now let's go over to the UV editing tab. Up here, just make sure you turn on material preview so you can actually see the colors properly, and we want to see our palette over here. So press this button up at the top and make sure you choose the palette. Anything that we made with the skin modifier isn't going to be unwrapped, so what you can do is just select everything, tab into edit mode, press A to select everything over here in the viewport, and we can press U. And for this method, it doesn't matter too much what the UV map looks like. Most people will use Smart UV Project, and I usually just set the island margin to something like 0.005 and press enter, and that should be fine. Let's reset everything to white, so come over to the UV editor, press A to select everything, S to scale, and 0, and everything will scale down to this single point over here, and then you can press G to move it around, and you can see as I do that, all of the colors are changing, and that is basically how you change the colors. Over here, we can tab back into object mode. Basically, you just select any of the objects, tab back into edit mode, A to select everything, and then over here in the UV editor, you can just move this around to change the color. And whatever you put it on top of, that's the color that it's going to be. I'll put it somewhere around here. You can also select multiple things at a time. So I know I want some other things to be orange. I'm just going to shift and left click on everything that I want to be orange. I'll choose the eyebrows and I'll choose the body, tab into edit mode, A to select everything. And you can see now we have a dot on white and one on orange because we already changed part of it to orange. So what you can do is just click and drag to select this over here and then G and just move it to the same spot. I want the eyebrows to be a darker color orange, so I'll press Alt-A to deselect everything. I can hover over the eyebrow and press L. So now we can come over here and press G and Y, and let's just move this up right there. Let's select the pupil and the mouth, tab into edit mode, press A to select everything. Let's make this black. Back in object mode, I'll select this mouth part with the whiskers. I want to select only the whiskers, so I'll go into vertex select and X-ray mode, and I'll just shift and drag to select just the tips, then Control plus on the numpad to select everything, go back into face select, and then we can just drag this down to make these black. I want the nose and the inner ear to be the same color, so I'll select the nose and shift select the head in object mode, tab into edit mode, Alt Z to turn X-ray mode off. We can select the nose and let's select these two faces right here. Over here, I'll press A, S, and 0 to scale those to the same point, and we can put both of these over to like a pale pink color like that. I don't like how the ear looks. I think this should be a little sharper in here. So we can go into edit mode, press N to open this side panel, and instead of the faces, I just want the outer edges. So let's go into edge select mode and we can deselect this with shift click, and let's turn mean crease up until we like the size. So I think right around 0.5 looks pretty good, and we can tab back into object mode and press N to make that panel go away. Let's select the coat right here, A to select everything. Let's make this also a purpley color and a little more pale. Tab back into object mode, select the shorts, A to select everything. Let's make this a little darker. Back in object mode, select the shoes, tab into edit mode. I want this part of the shoe to be the same color as the coat. So what we can do is maybe let's select everything else. It might be easier to do that. So in face select mode, Alt and left click right here to select that loop. Control plus to grow the selection. We can hover over this and press L, and the same thing with the tongue. And now we can press Control I, and that should invert the selection, so we have the bottom of the shoe also, which is fine. Now in object mode, I'm gonna shift select this, go back into edit mode. Now we can actually see both. So let's just select the white part and move it to the same spot. I think this part and that part should be white, but maybe let's select the tongue and make it the same color as the nose. Back in object mode, select the shoe, shift select the nose like that, and we can drag the white part to this color over here so they're the same. And that's it for the color. This method is pretty easy for blocking out solid colors with objects like this, but if you're texture painting, it might be a little easier if all of these are joined together. So let's just go back to the layout tab right here, and I'll show you how to apply all of the modifiers at once and join everything together. What I would suggest is turning down the subdivision surface as low as you think it can go, so you could turn all of these to 1. Another thing you can also do is press A to select everything, and then hold Alt while you press this, and you can turn all of them down at the same time. Obviously this looks too low poly, but we could turn it up by 1 maybe, and that actually looks all right. Then what we can do is right click, still with everything selected. We can go to convert to mesh right here. And that's kind of a quick way of applying all of the modifiers. And to join all of these together, what you can do is just select one of the objects again, press A to select everything, and Control J. And when you do that, the actively selected object, the one that is outlined in like a yellow lighter color, that's the object that all of them will be joined to. So you can see over here, everything was joined to the coat. Now, if you want to smooth this back out, you can just press Control 1 to add a subdivision surface to everything again. And that's why I think it's good to set the subdivision surface to as low as you think it can go, because you can always add one back on top. Sorry, what was that? This isn't enough and you want to see the character move? Well, to make that happen, you'll have to learn about rigging. I actually have a whole playlist about it, and I'm planning on making a video soon where I actually rig the character from this video. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.